Good evening and welcome to another exciting episode. Kajeno ke na le Tumelo. It's so exciting to have 𝐓𝐷𝐷𝐒, 𝐓𝐷𝐷𝐒. You know, attorneys, they have so much to do. Even when you get into trouble, so-called celebrities, they are there. You know, attorneys, they are like doctors. They will come and counsel, they will come and intervene and do all of that. So we're having Tumelo from Tumelo Attorneys, and we want to talk about this crisis. You remember our podcast is about moving people from crisis to control. After funerals, there's a lot happening, and that's when most families break up. So we called 𝐓𝐷𝐷𝐒 about certain things, just to simplify. Estate, and the other one, what is this and how we go about making it. Good evening and welcome to our podcast.
Good evening, 𝐶𝐿 for inviting me. And good evening to the viewers as well.
We're having problems. We want you to teach us. Let's start with the will, a trust, and estate. Can you just explain that? Because normally when people speak,
Actually, it's not, but they're all important components. Estate planning.
Yes.
Estate planning is something that is very important in that day. If you can think back to, I'm sure you've heard reference, quote, Benjamin Franklin.
Okay.
If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Will trust and estate planning. It's very important. If you look, Wills Act, Act number 7, and then Yona Act Act number 7 of 1953. What type of a will is that?
Yes.
So a will, it would be a document. A testator or testatrix specifies the desires of their heart in relation to their assets, what should happen to their assets when they are no longer alive, especially when they have loved ones, like their beneficiaries. What should happen to their assets? Who must get what when they are no longer there to decide? So, but when we're talking about a trust, trust is something that is very important. If you have certain assets, you place them in a trust. It is under the control of people, trustees. These trustees administer the assets that are in the trust, but it should be for the benefit of the beneficiaries. So that is the whole point of a trust. This one safeguards these properties to make sure they are protected and they are safe, and the beneficiaries will for a long time still benefit from those assets that are placed in the trust.
And what are the consequences of not having an estate plan?
Like I said in the beginning, Ndade, if you don't plan, you are simply planning to fail. Estate plan is not only for rich people or people who have a lot of assets. If you have something valuable, and you have loved ones, particularly children, or the people that you are looking after as a guardian, it's very important that you do estate planning. Estate planning involves what should happen when you are no longer there to decide for yourself, and it involves even your assets and liabilities. You make sure, household what's going to happen to Goldoza So while you're still alive, part of your planning when you are doing estate planning is to make sure that your liabilities will be covered. It's cover situation ya hore bana kapo measure koloi no mo reketse yona ka skoloto household isiyo ya nkua ya latua. So it's very important to do estate planning, and this process involves people like us, attorneys who can provide legal expertise and advice. It also involves financial advisors and accountants, the experts that can advise on financial planning. So it's and financial management. It's very important le kutlwisiso ya hore na what is estate planning, and we make sure that we do it for ourselves. Also, ntate, le ha o ntse o phela,
Yes.
it's for your peace of mind, knowing hore na thepa ena e ke e sebeletsang ka thata, what should happen to it? Should I no longer be here? Kapo ntate o sa kula, you are incapacitated. What should happen then to you and to your assets?
Sure. Tumelo, what are some common misconceptions about the wills that you personally encountered?
Yo, ntate, yenu yona he, there are so many. For instance, a lot of people think wills are only for people that have a lot of money.
Yeah,
Ne?
yeah.
E tla be le taba hore, why do I need a will when I don't have a lot of money? Ke na le fela ntlo ena ya ka RDP, kapo I just have these few assets that I have that I've inherited. But it's very important, as long as you have something valuable, and also when you have beneficiaries or people bao ba kgathallang that you love and care for, to make sure how disputes, there's clarity how what your intentions were with your assets. Who should take care of your minor children? Who should be the guardian? You decide all those things in the will. You can even testamentary trust in the will. So in the will you are saying how a trust should be created, and then these assets devolve in a certain way.
Yes.
The other misconception about wills, our people think how yentse willy hangwe. That's it. How na hlola o kgona hore we change kapo how batla e change mhlomo we yentse with a big institution. After that you get a better understanding of how wills work. You decide hore no, I actually want to have a will with somebody that I know ankutlisisang, my attorney Tumelo a buang puo ya ka, who can explain these things better. Now you think you must go back to the big institution ulo councillor William ba jwetsa hore you don't do that. It's a misconception. The most recent will automatically cancels the old will. So how so you khutlele morao mo kile wa nna wa etsa will teng and how so nkile qetore jwale ke batla my new will le Tumelo attorneys, we simply create and draft a will for you. Automatically the most recent will cancels the old one.
There's this thing that is called the power of attorney. I want you to tell us more about what is that, and then are there different powers of attorney? Because people speak this English and it's reducible, but sometimes we don't understand. So no, power of attorney, but we don't know what is this.
Power of attorney, this is a very important question and very relevant because they don't really understand what is it. Other people think, sure, immediately when I have signed the power of attorney, I've signed my life away. There are different types of powers of attorney. And power of attorneys, for example, you get a general one, which gives the authority to the agent. Motha power of attorney that person is called the principal. And they now authorize the agent to make decisions on their behalf. In other words, Motananle power of attorney can then step in your shoes and make decisions in relation to your finances, for example, your health. For example, you are in hospital and they must make a decision to switch off the machine or not. The person who has that power of attorney will be able to make that decision. But we also have what we call a special power of attorney. This one is not general. This one is specific in relation to a particular reason. For example, that day, Hare Dilaka deceased estate administration, and now you have to appoint an attorney as the executor. It's a special power of attorney. Yeah, specify it's only in relation to administration of this deceased estate. In other words, the attorney doesn't step in your shoes in totality or in general. It's only in relation to this specific matter, which is documented in the special power of attorney.
No, you know, this is amazing because now we are learning a lot. I always thought that when you give an attorney some powers, it's done. Attorney tells you, hey, this is what you need to do. Simply, it's simplifying this. There's this one here, a guardian. That is also creating a huge problem in our people. So I want you to tell us what is the role of the guardian And how does I choose one? Because maybe I don't have anyone else. I'm left with my kids, and bophelo ke bophelo, you never know what will happen tomorrow.
That's very
Ntho ena ya
true.
guardian ena, because mme ke mathata.
Ke mathata ntate. Ntho ena ya guardian, once again, from a perspective of an attorney,
Yes, yes.
it is documented. We have legislation, the Children's Act in particular, and how Sheba whole Section 18, yeah, Children's Act number 38, yeah, 2005. Ihlalosa ka botlalo hore na what is this guardianship? Who's the guardian? What is their role? So a guardian is someone who will then step into the shoes of taking care, particularly for minor children. So it's a caretaker, someone who will then make decisions on their behalf. Minor children who are under 18 years, for example, they cannot sign contracts by themselves, for themselves. They need a guardian. Itla beng ele motho a moholo, e leng hore ke yena mo hlokometseng, a tla mo tekenela. Jwale a guardian takes a role like that. Guardian also makes big decisions in relation to haholo ha re bua ka minor children, whether the child can actually go overseas. The guardian will consent hore this child is overseas on a particular trip or move there, and also in relation to the health of the child. If the child is sick, the guardian will make a decision when they are called upon to do so. A guardian can also be someone who's taking care of someone with special needs. For example, if you have an elderly person or someone mentally incapacitated and they are perhaps placed under curatorship, or they have a guardian looking after them. So you get to decide it, and you can decide it in your will. Haholo jwang ha o na le minor children. Hore na ha o so le siyo, who should then fulfill that role a tlatlang a hlokomela bana ba hao.
Sure. Because this thing of the guardian, of my lot, no, I don't know to la chelete ya ngwana. Guardian ye bibona kore ke starring.
Yes, in that case, that most of the time, fihlelo hore ha ho na le tjhelete e leng hore ngwana wa inherita kapo wa ifumana ka tsela e itseng, o ntsa le monyane ha kgone hore a ka fumana access to that money. In that case, we have the guardian fund, which is then administered by the Master of the High Court. So guardian fund ke mo tjhelete ya bana ba banyane e be one teng haholo jwang bo di inheritance, and then up until they reach age of maturity or majority, like 18, then ke teng mo e leng hore ba tla kgona hore ba access tjhelete. Fela a guardian in the meantime ha ntsa hodisa ngwana wa kgona hore a ye mane guardian fund a lo kenya kopo ho latela ditlhoko tsa ngwana. So in the meantime, while the child is still a minor, you can approach the guardian fund and you will still be able to be given certain funds for the maintenance of the children.
Earlier on, you spoke about updating the will. So is the estate planning leonar gonna re-update?
Very important that the hore re etse jwalo.
Because it's fine.
Nope.
But in life, wa bona hore ke sile malume shimza, maybe ke a kula mara ke a bona hore malume shimza o reckless nyana man. So can I come back and say I'm happy?
Absolutely, Ndade. You can update your will, but you can also, which is very important, update your estate plan. This is very important, especially whenever there are major changes or events that happen in your life. Let me make an example. You have created a will, you have estate planning done. Perhaps you are married. It happens that now you are no longer married, you are divorced. You have to update your will because you can just imagine you haven't updated your will, they are going to benefit as if they're still married because your will has not changed. You find that you have planned your estate, you have drafted your will. Your beneficiaries are two of your children. Yes. But now, exactly. How it inherited. So it's very important to update your estate planning regularly, particularly when there are major changes or events that happen in your life.
I want us to talk more about that because I think that's where also the problem is that I divorced someone, maybe I don't get married again, and then I passed on and she comes. I want us to talk about it because those are the things that happens in our society.
Right.
That
You know, it's so important in events tse kang tseo.
Yes.
Especially because if you separate
Yes.
but you don't divorce, if you are married legally but you don't separate legally, because if you separate legally, that is divorce.
Yes.
You just separate, give 5 years, 10 years, more, but legally you are still married. That menwana is still entitled to come and claim from your estate as a surviving spouse. As much as more, also
that one.
because how come wa divorce but so it's very important to do that. In relation to the children as well. Ke engwe ya mathata re kopanang le ona o fihlele le hore ntate mohlomong o na le ngwana kapo bana pele a kena kamanong ya lenyalo le mme enwa jwale o fihlele hore now he's married to a new wife but he has children with the previous wife or with a previous relationship le ha ene se lenyalo. We must always remember that biological children, bandade, they are entitled, in fact, they have a right to inherit from their father. Sometimes only the children ba lenyalo lena le letjha. But bana ba inelo, it was before marriage, they're excluded. That is absolutely wrong. So as long as ile bana bandade biologically, then they're also supposed to have a share in the estate yandade.
Tumelo mojolo ma ona le mojolo ona le ma mover in ke di trend no mojolo ma mover in ke kopana le motho se ke bona hore and then re dula mo. Unfortunately in 2 years ke a timela. Then what happens? Because I read a case ya Cape Town or somewhere when that na le mojolo and the girlfriend came when that passes on. Sebetsa jwalo.
As much as mojolong is lenyalo, ditokelo tsa lenyalo ha dio mojolong.
Okay.
But if we have stayed together for a certain period of time, automatically it turns into marriage. No, it does not. But if you can prove to the court that, for example, in the case in that they was maintaining you when he was alive, you have clear evidence that shows then you can in fact claim from the estate. Yes.
You know, how you're in a nightclub, and you know sometimes when you are drunk, you say things that you don't even know. And then kidna you met Tumelo, hi rata nyala, and then ninning didn't told you because I can't remember no sharp body video, body selfie, body situation right now. And I happen to speak that while I'm holding my food. What's that way?
Right.
Yeah, when
you are the one.
You are the one. So it was because then I'm gone.
Right.
And she comes. And say, oh, this is what he said.
Well, he promised me.
He promised me.
Okay.
So, estate.
Unfortunately, in an instant like that, Meg cannot come and claim.
Okay.
Our slay queen, unfortunately, she can't come and claim. But you promised that you were going to do this and that. Particularly, you promised you were going to marry me. If there's no clear evidence, you were married, whether customarily or in terms of civil marriage, kapo ha hosna any evidence to show that in fact you were maintaining then Meg cannot just come and claim based on a video that was taken, in an awkward moment.
Because whatever we are talking about, angel and that's it. So I want us to talk about this one. Maybe we take a short break. There's this one. Our families will be sitting, and there'll be minutes for that gathering, and we pay 5,000. But before we even get to the stage where we are married, I pass on. The minutes editing, a certain amount was paid. What happened?
The day what you are referring to now is customary marriage.
Okay.
In terms of our law, customary marriage is recognized. We've got the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, which recognizes the validity of customary marriage.
Sure.
But I'm so glad you are asking this because, a lot of people think when there was a family gathering and the minutes were taken, automatically that's marriage.
Yes.
But it's not. It does not work like that.
Okay.
First of all, it has to be clear what was the purpose of the gathering.
Okay.
Sometimes in our culture, there's a gathering for purpose of hopadala di damage
Yes.
for one,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
It's not necessarily that's marriage. So it must be clear in the minutes that the gathering of the two families was to negotiate marriage. So both sides have agreed that in fact their children are entering into customary marriage. And then in the minutes, usually it will show that these people from this family and on the other side of the family, they came together on this date and they must all sign to show who was there. Their names must also, an identity must be clear that they were there and the purpose. And most of the time, they have paid a certain portion of the lobola, right? But not necessarily finish the lobola. It doesn't mean, even if they have paid a full amount of the lobola, it doesn't mean right there after that first gathering, there's customary marriage. No. No, Ndade. So in your instance that you've given us as an example, if Ndade passes away after that first gathering, it doesn't mean that you were married with Mme. I will explain now what I mean. Customary marriage is a process. It's not a once-off, one-day thing. It includes a certain part which is very crucial to conclude that in fact there was customary marriage. There has to be the welcoming of the bride in the other family. In terms of the culture. In other words, after that first gathering, our youth, they will get married, but very important to conclude customary marriage, there has to be that opportunity where the family of the groom is now welcoming the bride. There's that traditional dress, wa amohela o fuwa bolibitso and then re a keteka hore jwale re se re na le ngwetsi. Then when that has happened, that's when we can say there was customary marriage.
Yeah, but this is dangerous. Number one, the she-man, guys, motho o tla tla ka di receipt le di e-wallet, he has been sending money. I need that maintenance. Let's take a short break, and after this, we continue talking to Tumelo Modise and learn more. But you know what? We're going to engage here even more and more because these subjects are something or sometimes as people we take them for granted, but there are some serious legal things that will put you in troubles. We'll be back shortly. We're still in conversations, Tumelo, attendees, and hey guys, we're talking some stuff here. There's things some jolo and the party and the chomi. Yo, I want us to go back to the distribution of specific asset or sentimental items to specific family member. How does one plan that?
That one, you can easily do it with a will.
Okay.
In your will, you will specify how you want your assets to be distributed.
Yes.
In other words, if Ndade has a house, you have furniture, or perhaps you have 2 houses. You get to decide who is going to keep the one house and then what's going to happen to the other one. You can even decide that this particular house should be a residential home for the family. It should not be sold.
Okay.
You can even decide that in your will. So with your will, that's when you get to decide what should happen and how your assets should be distributed.
And in main case of minors, having to inherit from the deceased parents, how do the law tackle the family dynamics in favor of the kids? Because you earlier spoke about it, but those family dynamics at that time,
it's very important to also understand that in terms of law, when we are dealing with minor children,
yes,
the law is very specific that the person who will be appointed as the executor, if there is no will.
Yes.
So if there's no will, we use what we call Interstate Succession Act.
Okay.
Interstate Succession Act number 81 of 1987.
So-
And 𝐿𝐿, that explains what will happen to your assets if you didn't draft a will.
Okay.
So what will happen with the minors? By law, the executor, who is the person who administers the estate, will have to be an attorney. So in other words, executor cannot be mme wa ngwaneno kapo any other elder in the family. It has to be an attorney to
yes,
make sure that an attorney will ensure the rights of the children are protected. Because what needs to happen, especially if there is money, the portion that must come to the minor child, it has to be placed in the guardian fund
Yes.
until the child has reached the age of majority, and they can then access the money themselves. So tjhelete ya ngwana, it must go to the guardian fund. But they don't understand that tjhelete ya ngwana ha motswadi a sa hlokahetse ha etle ho ngwana kapa ha e tswe e le jwalo fela ho motho a hlokometseng ngwana. Le ka ba ya ba guardian o tlo tlameha hore ho be le tjhelete e nyenyana e ntse etswa ho latela ditlhoko tsa ngwana, but most of the money will be kept safe in the guardian fund until the child is an adult and they can manage and administer their own funds.
You as attorneys or law practitioner, you normally deal with case studies. In your experience, what kind of dispute have you came across, and how can we learn from that?
Some of the disputes that are very sad,
Yes.
especially when we relating to the children,
Yes.
is a situation where you find that certain children are excluded.
Yes.
In other words, they are not reported as the beneficiaries in the
Yes,
estate.
yes.
And now, because they are not reported, they don't get their portion of the share, particularly if it's children who are from extramarital affairs or children that were born before the parents entered into marriage.
yes.
So those are usually the children that suffer the most, especially if you find that the parent has now remarried and there are other children in the new marriage.
Yes.
So those are some of the challenges that we have. Other challenges that we have, you find that people have this understanding that the share of the child must come to them, and then they use it for their own
Personal,
needs,
yes.
for their own personal needs. That is also a sad situation. And when we're doing estate planning, we must make sure that we are safeguarding such occurrences so that we don't find that our children are left suffering while we worked so hard for them.
Yes. And what are the key factors that determine how an estate can be distributed after the owner passes?
Well, what's important to know in relation to how the estate has to be distributed, there has to be an executor that's appointed. The executor, especially in a situation where there is no will. Because if you have a will, you will then appoint an executor in your will. Executor is someone who's very important when it comes to administering the estate, because they give direction as to what should happen, and they have the responsibility to ensure that all the beneficiaries are covered. Another thing that is very important is to make sure that we understand that we are not insolvent.
Okay.
In other words, our assets are more than our liabilities. Immediately that they had how defeat your assets,
The asset, yes.
then you are insolvent, which means that you will find that this car that you're driving in your beautiful home, you don't have life covers, you didn't do proper estate planning. Now, when you are not there, the bank will come and repossess their assets. So it's very important that we plan properly and we have, we have safeguarded and we have life covers, for example. We don't have a lot of money or wealth that can cover everything, and a lot of our assets gets us colored. So it's very important that we make sure that we do estate planning. If you have a life cover, a lot of our people don't know this. If you have a life cover, that's the money that can be used to cover your liabilities when you are no longer there. They will be able to settle that house if there was no insurance, and then the children will still have a home.
Without having a will, is there any other way one can protect their asset or estate if mutu ahloka?
We've already said that if there is no will, then the estate will devolve in terms of Interstate Succession Act number 81 of 1987. But there are other ways that you can safeguard your assets. For example, if you have a trust.
Okay.
If your assets are in the trust, then they are administered by the trustees for the benefit of your beneficiaries. So in other words, you don't have a will, but you have a trust. And the trust has a trust deed. It's an instrument of the trust. That is the document that stipulates what should happen to your assets. Who are the beneficiaries and how should they benefit? So that way, with a trust, you still have an option that can safeguard your assets for your beneficiaries.
Tumelo, there are instances where you get people coming with police station.
Affidavit.
Because sometimes I hear that people comes with affidavit when we just estate plan and that affidavit.
It's very important that to understand that affidavit has a will.
Okay.
Affidavit.
Because the affidavit.
I've noticed hore ehlile sebediswa hohle mona motho o reka koloi ka affidavit o rekisa ntlo ka affidavit ntengwe le ngwe batho ba gona ba nahana hore ha re ntse fela affidavit le contract affidavit ke contract
le mojolo mona o itse o tla mbetsa affidavit se na le stamp mo
wa utlwisisa jale ho bohlokwa hore re utlwisise hore na will yona ke eng ke ka ho ke hlalositseng ha re qala hore will e na le molao wa teng e leng Wills Act. Act number 7 enana ya hlalosa hore na Will Act number 7 of 1953 e hlalosa ka botlalo hore what is a valid will. Jwale an affidavit is not a will. It has to be a valid affidavit. Ka manzwa mang, I mean a valid will to be a will. If it's a valid affidavit, it still remains an affidavit and not a will. In other words, hore e be will ho tlamelo bona le testator or testatrix monga yona. E tlamelo be le dipaki. Dipaki tsena tlamelo di be older than 14 years in age. And it they are not going to inherit from that will. In other words, your children cannot be witnesses. Hobane will ye itlaba invalid. Hobane le bona ba tlotla ba inherita from that will. And it has to be written. That's very important. And you must make sure happy the assets that you include in the will are your own assets in that. How do la RDP? Elen clear maspale. Osna title deed ya teng. Hasn't clear how. Kin clear maspale. Yo ka se avelane, o ka se nteto ka se avelane ka thepa e senya how. Ho tlamelo hore o utlwisise hore it must be your own asset to be able to include it in the will to decide who must inherit it.
Seems I will be fit. What can you say in closing also Elisa Basotho beso Elisa Africa for rona ka taba tse bohlokwa tse re buile ka tsona?
Ntate ke rata hore ke ba eletsa ka hore let's be enlightened. Let's develop ourselves as African people. We have means and ways that we can avoid conflicts, especially in instances where someone has passed away. Let's use all these resources that are available to us. Ha re ske ra tshaba ho atamela maqwetha ba re hlalosetsa haholo jwang maqwetha e leng hore ba tshwana le rona, ba bua puo ya rona, ba utlwisisa mathata a rona.
Re batla ka sekgowa ene nako tse di ga utlwisisa dutse mono wa hlaloswa ka sekgowa batho ha o utlwisise.
Wa e utlwisisa ntate fela o ntse o re ntho e nngwe le nngwe le kgwa le buileng ke yona. Ha mathata a hlaha jwale ha o sa tseba hore na o etse jwang. Jwale it's very important hore batho ba bo rona ba ske ba tshaba wa atamela maqwetha. Come to us so we can be able to explain these things in a way that you can understand, so that you make informed decisions, even when you are entering into a contract. Ska tatela o tekena. And there's nothing wrong to say, even to your employer, before I sign ke kopange ko e bala with my attorney and hlalosetse all the clauses. There's nothing wrong with that.
The excitement, you know, I was unemployed, therefore.
You see, but we shouldn't fear. We should be comfortable to know that it is within our rights to do that. So let's use the opportunities and the resources that are available for us, so that in the long run we can protect our assets, we can protect ourselves, and we can protect our loved ones.
That was Conversations with Tumelo 𝐄𝐏𝐈𝐒𝐄𝐃. We're going to invite her again and talk more about this, because it's a crisis, it's a chaos when somebody passes on. How we lose chabin sarona. Eba twaina ilongore le di family re sa utlwana. Se re qetella re bona fela ka mafu fela. Ibile bukong ka qeto re, you know what? Le ha ka ba ba hlokahala will never be capable. So let's learn, let's empower ourselves. And get maybe the file. Go and open a file and know more about this. Don't wait for the day when things are not going right. In Conversations with Thabang, until we meet next time, FS Online Network and YouTube channel, that is where you find us. Good evening.